Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It is day 20 of my comic review video day calendar, reviewing comics every day, random things from my collection. And here's one that I've wanted to talk about for a zillion years, and finally getting to just the first issue of it. Maybe eventually I'll finally review more of this series. This is Resurrection Man #1, which came out in 1997. This is written by Abnett and Lanning, who are known for their Guardians fame. And these guys used to do a lot of material together. They split up back in 2014. Kind of sadly, they both went on to do their own kind of solo work. They had some sort of a falling out. I'm not totally sure what happened with them, but it seems like they were just both ready to work for themselves. And they came back in the early 2010s to do a volume 2 of this book. This was canceled in 1999 and only got 27 issues and a 1 million issue, I think, which was a thing that DC was doing right then, and this was mixed into that. And when New 52 started, there were several more obscure things that were resurrected, including Resurrection Man, and it didn't last very long. It was one of the first books to get the axe when New 52 scrapped some things that weren't selling very well and got back up to the number 52 with some different titles that launched, and that was to nobody's surprise. I should go back at some point and look at the numbers on that and see how it actually sold, because I heard from a few people here and there that were trying out a bunch of different things when New 52 started, that they tried out Resurrection Man and thought it was interesting, but I talked to almost nobody that had ever heard of that character and looked at it before. He is more well known now because he was weirdly brought back to life for New 52. That was when Bob Harras took over and weirdly was running that company after he ran Marvel into the ground into the 90s. It was a very strange choice for editor-in-chief, and it seemed like he was trying to relive the glory days of the 90s and go back to, I want to say, things that were working back then, but he also brought back some things that weren't, and tried to make things look more and more like his heyday, including Resurrection Man. But I'm not here to talk about Volume 2. I'm just going to talk about this first issue and give you the setup, the premise, what this is about, and if you're interested, you can go seek this out. I think it's on DC's digital service right now. I'm not sure. But anyway, so Abnett Lanning writing with art by Jackson Guice, who I didn't realize was really kind of formative for my comics interests as much as he is from when I was a kid. He apparently didn't, I guess, co-create the Eradicator, but brought the Eradicator into Reign of the Supermen and was one of the main artists that worked on that. And he also did some Birds of Prey stuff in the early 2000s. So that's really interesting. The more I looked into him, the more I saw titles that I recognized and that I had read some as a kid. But anyway, so your basic premise for Resurrection Man is just as it sounds in the title. He is Mitch Shelley. He is a superhero who can not be killed, or rather, every time he dies, he comes back to life with a different superpower. It sounds very much like a primetime drama premise, like the sort of thing that you'd see in the 90s or early 2000s, where you've got a character that every episode something is different with and has something to do with death, kind of a trope that you saw a lot of with things like, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind um is Pushing Daisies, the show with the guy who can momentarily bring somebody back to life to find out the way they died. This feels like that sort of premise, or like a Quantum Leap kind of thing, where it's very ripe for anthology stories, episodic stories, but there's also a larger story brewing in the background. This is a very Vertigo feeling book, I should say, and I thought that right away when I first read this. Real quick, I'll mention I bought this entire series with a collection back in 2003, 2004. The first big collection I bought. I think I bought 3,000 issues at once, and that's also where I got my initial collection of Spawn, which I have subsequently sold, and I still regret that a little bit. But that's where this came from, and this reminds me a lot of Spawn, like so many things. I'll talk about that a little bit later, at the risk of making this too much like Spawn Year instead of not Spawn Year. But I was immediately intrigued looking at this because it doesn't feel like it belongs in DC continuity proper, really, but there are lots of references, or at least a couple in this first issue, that try to make it clear that even though tonally it's a more adult thing and feels more Vertigo, and just looks like that. It's not. It's kind of counterintuitive for a superhero book in that you have a superhero that doesn't have a typical costume. He doesn't know who he is. We've got the typical amnesia trope, which automatically makes it feel more like a indie edgy thing, like with Spawn. And just look at him. I mean, he looks like an American John Constantine, and yet you've got references to things like Soda Cola in order to make it real clear that it's supposed to be mainstream DC continuity, to fundamentally root it in that universe. So the idea, as I said, is this is a guy who doesn't know who he is. He's getting flashes to his previous life, kind of like Spawn. Occasionally he gets these massive info dumps, like with Spawn, where he gets quite a bit more quite a bit more knowledge about himself so that we can progress the narrative forward a little bit farther, just like Spawn. Here, there's more of an explanation for it. It happens whenever he dies and comes back to life. He'll suddenly remember quite a bit more about himself, but we are introduced to him after he's been living homeless. He's kind of a wandering hobo for a long time. He doesn't know how long it's been. Maybe it's been months, maybe it's been years. But as far as we know here, he's only died once or twice. So he saves some kids that are in a drive-by, or almost in a drive-by shooting on the interstate, and he gets killed during that whole situation, and he has, I guess, died before that because he has the power of flight. And then when he's resurrected, he has a new power, and that's this weird ability to put up walls of air. Throughout the series, Mitch Shelley will get odder superpowers, and that's one of the things that kind of kept me coming back when I was reading it before. And by the way, I don't remember a ton about this series. There are mysteries here that I don't have the answers to right now because it's been so long since I read this, so it'll be like reading it for the first time when I finally go back through this whole thing again. A couple things I remember here and there, but like the villain, I don't remember a great deal about. The guy who's looking for Mitch Shelley and who has hired a couple of sexy female assassins or mercenaries, I should say, to go find him. I don't totally remember their deal. I don't totally remember this creepy bad guy's deal. Trying to find him here. But anyway, Mitch is confused, doesn't know where he, there he is. There's our villain. Mitch doesn't know what he's about, except when he goes to a library, and there's this kind librarian who brings him in after hours because their policy is to not help homeless people. She is able to look up a bunch of information about him, or at least a few things, and figures out that he has a wife, and figures out what his last name is. He thinks about trying to date her for a second, and then says, I guess I'm not going to ask her out. or maybe he's just being quippy when he says that. I'm not sure. Mitch is a somewhat sarcastic character. He's kind of witty. Like I said, he reminds me a lot of John Constantine. He seems like he could have that self-destructive streak, although we don't know very much about him yet. And like I said, I don't remember what all of his background is, like how good or bad of a person he is. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you because I don't want to give anything away if you haven't read this series, because I know I'm talking about this for majoritively an audience that will not have read this, is not familiar with this book. But it's a thing I brought up in the past here and there, kind of like I'm a fan of this, and like I did like this run. I just don't remember, a ton about it. It's been so long since I looked at it. I've talked before in this series about characters that I think of myself as a fan of, but I don't know as much as I'd like to about. Characters like Cassandra Cain, or groups like the Birds of Prey. Resurrection Man is a character that I feel more like I sort of adopted, where it's like he doesn't really have fans, and I discovered him having never heard of him before, and then met very few people pre-New 52 who knew who this was. So I'll take this fandom on. I'll be a Resurrection Man fan, and I don't feel like I have to be super familiar with the material or having looked at it a million times like I might other things I'm a fan of. In order to proclaim myself that, because Resurrection Man needs fans. He needs people to say, I've read that, I like that, and so I probably talk it up and talk about it more than I usually would something that I don't know ins and outs of entirely, just because hey, I've looked at that and I know what that is, and not a lot of people are fans of that, and I think it's deserving of being talked about a little bit. People should go back and take a look at this. So anyway, Mitch is helped out by this librarian, and when these mercenaries come to find him, she ends up putting herself in the crossfire and dying for him. And she is this selfless woman who does everything she can for her fellow man, and is setting an example for Mitch to follow when he doesn't really have any moral center. It's been all about survival this whole time for him. And he goes, this person died for me. And that's kind of interesting, right? Like, he's Resurrection Man. We're making a lot of connections to Jesus. There's some real on-the-nose, heavy-handed stuff here and there with this book toward the end. When people start to talk about this guy who seems to come back from the dead and has new powers. There's a person who goes, he rose on the third day, because Mitch Shelley dies again at the end of this, in a really contrived situation with a big rig truck that runs into a gas station, and Mitch stops that with his wall of air and ends up dying in the process. And the whole thing feels really kind of easy and a forced plot point, so that he can die again and get a new power at the end. And we're given a Jesus allegory there. But it's kind of interesting that somebody dies for him when he's Resurrection Man, when we're connecting him up with Jesus. And I don't think he's supposed to be Jesus exactly. Like, you get the sense that he probably was a really flawed individual, and maybe did something that led to his becoming Resurrection Man, and that he's got sins to atone for, certainly. Again, some pretty on-the-nose stuff. We're in a town called Crucible. That's just kind of blatantly in your face, right? He's going through a crucible, as you can see. And he's so at the end, he gets fire powers, and that's one of the things that makes it feel like we've got kind of the pilot for a TV show. Like every episode, he would probably get some kind of new power, or maybe you'd get two-parters where he'd have a power for a little while. We have to keep contriving ways for him to die. There's this big looming mystery that's set up at the beginning about who he is and where he comes from, and if he has some kind of a road to redemption story going on in order to entice you to come back and look at this again. I gotta be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that there hasn't been an attempt at a TV show with this, because the premise is so ripe for that. And you might say, well, it's really obscure, so of course we haven't done that. But there are other DC properties that has been done with before. This feels right there for an NBC show or a CW show. There's been not one but two adaptations of Human Target, but not Resurrection Man yet. I'll be really surprised if this is never attempted. If this was announced tomorrow on HBO Max, I would not be surprised by that. So you get to the end of this, and somebody suggests the name Resurrection Man. You very much get the kind of like some sort of a Resurrection Man sort of explanation for his name, and Mitch adopts that by the end. It's not that bad, but it's a little bit like that. And he's got not the best reputation either, because whoever the bad guy is that's trying to find him and killing people along the way, and who has hired these women, people are misconstruing, I think, it seems like, that guy with Mitch Shelley, where people think that he gets a new power every time he's resurrected, and he's also killing people along the way. Like, they're combining these two characters. Or maybe that guy also has the same thing Resurrection Man does, and he's like an evil Resurrection Man. We'll find out if we read more of this together. I actually don't think that's what it is, if memory serves, but the first issue is leading you to think that perhaps that's the case. So, how much Spawn is Mitch Shelley? Well, again, he's got amnesia. He's been wandering the earth, kind of just surviving, not really sure what to do with himself. There clearly is a supernatural component to this. The man can't die, or he can, but he comes back every time. So he's a little bit like Spawn in that sense, that he's very overpowered, and he seems like kind of a wraith, where he is not undead, but, I mean, maybe, because like, we don't really know, but it's not the same thing as Spawn. He doesn't come from hell, but he is a character who has died and has come back and has no business being alive now, and is trying to figure out what his purpose is, certainly. And there's somebody who seems to have some sort of a plan for him, maybe. So those are all the ways in which he's like Spawn, and he's just a very edgy sort of character. He's not like Spawn in that he's actually proactive. He actually cares about people who are not himself. And even though he looks very mopey on the page, he's not constantly complaining. There's not a lot of self-pity with Mitch. I find him as sympathetic as I can, a character like this. I don't go in for amnesia plots usually. I talked about that a lot with Spawn here. It can be done well, but it's very few and far between. Usually an amnesia component is there to manufacture drama and to just keep an audience guessing, and is kind of there in the place of real character building, real character development and progression. This, if memory serves, is better than that, and it immediately reads like it could be better than that. But the risk you always run is at the point where the character gets all of his memories, like as you're developing him, where this guy is building a moral center, trying to decide what kind of a person he wants to be. When he gets all of his memories back, do you do the interesting thing where he is this new person that is having to fight his old self's ideals or lack thereof, or MO, or whatever, almost as if the character himself, like his personality, his identity, has been resurrected into another person, and he's not really the old guy anymore, and he's got to fight for dominance with an earlier version of himself, almost like he's Mitch 2.0? Or do you just have the old version overtake the new version, and everything you just did is pointless and a waste of time? Because I've seen that done, and that's really boring and pointless, and it ends up not really being about a three-dimensional character who grows and changes so much as a placeholder until we finally decide who we want this guy to be, almost as if personality is an afterthought. And like I said, if memory serves, this book is better than that, and so far from the beginning it reads like it's better than that. This has a really cool cover. If you get this in the initial single, it's I guess kind of in lenticular. There's a so it's a normal flat cover, but then there's one piece of it you can see there on the screen, and I'll show you my copy a little bit closer. There's one piece of it that's raised, and just that circle inside of the skull face is lenticular and changes as you move it around, and that's kind of a neat touch for that cover. Like I said, I definitely want to review more of this at some point, because I'll be one of the only people that's bothering with that, and I've never read all of the New 52 run. I think Mitch shows up in some other things during New 52 also. Austin mentioned something to me about him being in their Suicide Squad, and I don't know if he's just a recurring character there or if he's actually a member of the team. That's a perfectly good use of that character. I can totally see him on that team. And I kind of like the idea that maybe I need to read that, so I don't know if this is done, but immediately I'm thinking, okay, if I'm writing that, I would have Amanda Waller not realize what exactly his deal is, and not know that if she kills him, he'll just come back. That could be a lot of fun. I wonder if that's done with it. Abnett or Lanning, or both, like I said, came back. I think both of them for the revival of this. And if memory serves, it kind of just picks up where it left off before. I remember reading at least the first few issues of that, and I think I own most of, if not all of that. But anyway, I digress. That is Resurrection Man #1. Holds up much better than I expected it to, honestly. Like I said, there is some on-the-nose stuff. Oh, I didn't mention the snow globe motif. That's a thing that's kind of interesting here. That's, I don't think, as forced and in your face. We get a physical snow globe that's got a Betty Boop in it, because Warner Brothers is the parent company, and so anytime we need a cartoon character, we go to something they own. But anyway, the idea is supposed to be that Mitch feels like he lives in a snow globe, in that it keeps... It's like the world keeps being shaken up, and then it changes, and then he's learning a little bit more about the world he lives in. And I think that's a really good visual metaphor for what's happening with this character. That every time he dies, he gets a new power. So it's like you're shaking his whole world, and then you see what you end up with. I mean, like it breaks down a little bit, and then like an actual snow globe, it would be the same thing every time. But I think that idea also doubles in that he doesn't feel like he has control of his world, and it keeps turning upside down. That's pretty good stuff. I like that image a lot. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, folks, and I'll see you again tomorrow with another one. I'm Captain Logan, and happy reading.